Okay, in this video we're going to talk about comparing and ordering decimals. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the instructions here in our notes, and the very first step that we have to compare and order decimals is to use our place value. And in order for us to use the place value correctly, we have to first line up the decimals. And a lot of people get confused when I say that because it should say line up the decimal points. That's the first thing that we should line up. So you can see here step 1, when I highlighted in green, the decimal points are perfectly lined up, one on top of the other. And then we can go to step 2. Step 2 says add a place holding 0. So you can see that the first number is missing a spot. We can fill it in with a 0. That's just a placeholder. So step 2 is done. Step 3, we're now going to compare from left to right. So on the left, I have the very first place value, which is the ones place, and that's just a 4 and a 4. So it doesn't help me to compare which one is bigger or which one is smaller. So I have to move on to the next place value, going from left to right. So the next one is going to be the 5 and the 3, which is the 10th place. And because these two numbers are different, now I can compare them and I can say which one is bigger and which one is smaller. So now I know that 4 and 56 hundredths is going to be greater than 4 and 347 thousandths. And this is the inequality sign that I use, the greater than sign. Now, you may not remember the greater than or less than sign, so let's go ahead and write those down here. I'll show you where they come from. The less than and greater than signs. Some people think that they're alligator mouths or they're like mouths that eat the bigger number, and there's different ways that elementary teachers teach it so you can understand and remember which one to use, which is great. But when you get up to the upper grader levels, that's kind of discouraged to say it like it's the mouth that opens to the bigger number or eats the bigger number. So I'm going to teach you where they come from. These symbols, somebody didn't just make them up. They actually come from a number line. If you draw a line right in between and you put numbers in it, you can see that the two arrows that are going to the left and the ones going to the right, it's just a number line. The arrows means that the numbers keep going on and on and on, all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So what that means is that like 0, for example, would be less than a 1, a 2, or a 3 because it's farther to the left. So we use the less than symbol when we compare it. Or a 3 would be greater than a 2 or a 1 or a 0 because 3 is farther to the right. So the numbers that go to the right get bigger and bigger. The numbers that go to the left on the number line get smaller and smaller. That's why we use those symbols that look kind of like alligator mouths, but we don't say that anymore. So now let me go back and tell you that one of the good strategies to do is to label your numbers. Once you have identified which one is the biggest one and which one is the smallest one, even if you just put a B for big or an S for small, or if you want to write the whole word like I just did, go ahead and do that. That way you can figure out which number was the biggest and which number was the smallest in the place value that told you that would help you compare these two decimal points. All right, so now we know that 4 and 56 hundredths was the biggest, and here's another trick. If you have identified this one as the biggest, so I've seen some kids do this before. They draw 2 dots closest to the biggest one, and then with the second number, which is in this case the smallest, it would just get 1 dot. So whenever you're trying to draw the inequality symbol, if you have really hard time figuring out which one to use, you can use this little dot method. You give 2 dots to the big number and 1 dot to the smaller number, and then you just connect the dots and you come up with the correct symbol. Even if you don't know which one or what it's called, you can at least get the correct symbol when you compare the two numbers. So that's just a little extra information if you need it. Now we're going to use the number line to compare numbers, and like I talked about it before, the numbers on the left of the number line, those are your smaller numbers, so those are the least numbers, and then the ones on the right, those are your greatest numbers. So there's your two symbols right there that we talked about already in the number line. So I'm just going to highlight those for you, or like box them in so you can see where they come from. And now the question in the middle of our page says which sign belongs between the 4 and 563 thousandths and the 4 and the 367 thousandths. So in this case, we're going to use a number line. Notice that the number line has the number 4 at the left and the number 5 in the right. And right in the middle, we have the number 4 and 5/10, which is the midpoint between the whole number 4 and the whole number 5. But if you also notice, in our first number, we have 3 numbers behind the decimal point. That means we have 3 place values there, the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So in order for us to be able to put that in the number line correctly, I always tell my students to go ahead and fill in the same amount of place values in the number line so you can know exactly where you're going to put that number in the number line. So I'm going to add 2 zeros after the 5, so that means that we have 500 thousandths, and now we know that 4 and 563 thousandths is going to be more than 500, because 563 is more than 500, so it's going to be closer to the right of that number, which means that the other number we have, 4 and 367 thousandths, has to be to the left, because 367 thousandths is going to be less than 500 thousandths. So now that we put them on the number line, it's really easy to see which number is biggest, because 4 and 563 thousandths is closer to the right than the other one, the one in black. Then we're going to use the symbol, which is the greatest than symbol, and that's the symbol that's on the right of the number line. So hopefully that helps you with this whole inequality sign. If this confused you a little bit, then go back and rewatch it and listen to my instruction again so you can kind of understand where all these symbols are coming from. All right, there's another way to compare them by using a model. If you have 2 decimals like this one, 56 hundredths and 34 hundredths, we can also model it. So the first number we have is 56 hundredths. In the tenths place, we have a 5. To model 5 tenths, we are going to shade in 5 little columns going down. So each one of those strips represents 1/10, because it takes 10 of them to make a whole. So that's why each one represents 1/10. And we need 5 of them, because there's a 5 in that place value. Then in the hundredths place, we have a 6. So that means that we need 6 of those little bitty squares shaded in, because each one of those little squares represents 1/100th, since it takes 100 of them to make one whole. So there's my model for the first number. The second number is 34 hundredths. So in the same way, I'm going to shade in 3 tenths by shading 3 columns going down. And then finally 4 hundredths, so 4 little boxes. There's my 2 models. And it's really easy to see that the top one has more shaded in and the bottom one has less shaded in. So in order for me to compare them, I'm going to use the symbol, which is 56 hundredths is more or is greater than 34 hundredths. So that's a quick, easy way to do that if you want to draw that those models. And sometimes you have to, and sometimes that's the only way you can do it. So that's perfectly okay. That's a tool that you have to use. The next thing we're going to do is use our steps to order them from greatest to least in this next quick practice problem. So there's, you can see my decimals are lined up already, perfectly straight, one on top of the other. And then we're going to fill in any missing zeros, so we can have 3 numbers behind the decimal. So we can have all the way to the thousandths place filled in every one of our decimal points, decimal numbers. So now we're going to start comparing from left to right. The ones place is all the same, they're all 3s, so that's not going to help us. But if you look at the tenths place, you have a 4, a 1, a 4, and a 3. So you have probably right now made already an observation that some of those numbers are the same, but 2 of them are different. And we can tell that 1 in the tenths place is the smallest one of between 4 and 3. 1 is the smallest one. So we're going to go ahead and label that one as the smallest. That's going to be our smallest number. And because we want the order to go from greatest to least, then what means we're going to be having that number in the last place. So out of the 4 numbers, that's going to be the 4th place, because that's the smallest number. So I'm going to put like 1, 2, 3, 4 up there so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And now we just found number 4, the smallest, because least, the word least means smallest. Now we're going to look at the next number, which is the 3. 3 is smaller than 4, but it's bigger than 1. So that means that the one with the 3 in the tenths place is going to be the next smallest number. So I'm going to put that here so I can label it correctly. And now I found my smallest and then the next smallest. So I know which one is going to go in the 4th place and in the 3rd place. Now if I look at the other two numbers, I have a 4 and a 4. They're the same number. So that means that in order for me to compare between those two numbers, I have to move on to the next decimal place value, which is the hundredths place. In the first number, I have a 0, and in the second number, I have a 2, which means that the 2 is going to be bigger. So that means that is going to be the biggest number that I have. That's going to be my first place. I just found my first number in that order. And then that just leaves the other one. And by the way, greatest means biggest, so I'm just going to put that note there so you can remember that, since I labeled least as the smallest. So the last number is the number 2. That's going to be the next biggest. Okay? So now that I have all of that labeled correctly, and some of you probably say, okay, well, you're done, right? Wrong. Because even though I have numbered them 1, 2, 3, and 4, the final answer needs to be listed out in the correct order. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the first place, which was this one, and I'm going to write it in the original form it was given to me. In other words, I'm not going to include the 0 that I put there because I put it, but it wasn't in the original problem. So I'm going to put 3 and 42 hundredths. The second number, and I'm going to cross it out so I don't mess with it anymore and I don't write it by mistake again. The second number is going to be this one, which is the very top one, and that just gave me a 3, a decimal, and a 4. So that's going to be the next number I write, 3 and 4/10. Then number 3 is going to be this one that I've identified with the 3. That's the next smallest, and that's going to be the 3 and 346 thousandths. They gave me every one of those numbers, so I have to write them down. And then finally, the last one is going to be the number 4, which is 3 and 12 hundredths. So I've ordered them from greatest to least, and that's the correct answer. Now, this is the word problem that you might see in a test, in a situation where you have a common assessment or the STAR test or anything like that. So you have this chart with Juan, James, John, and Jordan, who ran a 100-meter dash, which is just a race, and the times is what's listed besides their names. And the question is asking for us to put the times in order from fastest to slowest. So you have to think about that. The fastest time, if you're the fastest person, you get there faster. You get there before anybody else. So your time is going to be the smallest number. And that's one of the things that a lot of students get mixed up on. And they think that the fastest get the biggest number because always people think that the biggest number is the best thing. Well, if you're talking about money, maybe because you have more money. But in this case, you're talking about time. The fastest time means you have the smallest amount of time because you're quicker, you're faster than everybody else. And the slowest person means you have the biggest amount of time because it took you longer. So the first step to do here is to make sure that our decimals are lined up. And according to our chart, they are lined up, so we don't have to do anything else. Step 2, fill in any missing zeros for those place holdings. So now we have all the same place values, which is the thousandths place. And then we can compare from left to right. My tenths place is just ones, so that doesn't help me compare which one is bigger than the other. My ones place, they're all eighths, so again, that doesn't help me. But if I look at my tenths place, I have a 3, a 5, and a 6. So you can probably already say that the Jordan is the biggest number. So because it has the biggest number, he was the slowest time. It took him longer to get to the finish line. So he's going to be the 4th place because he's the slowest person. So I'm going to put his name right here, Jordan. And I'm finished with Jordan. So I don't want to cross it out so that I don't get confused by having an extra name in my list. Now, if I compare again the 3, and the 5 in the 10th place, I know 5 is bigger than 3 and 3. So that means that John is going to be my 3rd place because he's the slowest out of those 3 names that are left. It has a bigger time. It took him longer to get there. So that means John is going to be 3rd place. And then if I look at Juan and James, I have a 3 and a 3 in the 10th place. So I can't compare between those two based on that one place value. So I have to go to the next place value, which is the hundredths. So I'm going to look at the 2 and the 4. So now I know that James has a bigger number, so it means James was slower getting there. So he's going to be my second place. So I'm going to put James there, and that means that Juan had the smallest amount of time, and that means he won the race because he was the fastest. He got there in the smallest amount of time. And that's it. That's how you compare and order decimals by using these quick steps. Thank you for watching, and if you need to rewatch it, rewind it, pause it, take notes, and do whatever you need to do to this video so that you can learn this concept. Thank you.